Hi everyone, I'm Tony Delberto. I'm 34 years old these days. That's very old. I live in Ringwood, so in Victoria, and I grew up fairly close by actually, just in Mooroolbark, which is probably about 10 k's further out where mum and dad live. Born in Ferntree Gully, so always out in this eastern side of Melbourne. Always lived in Victoria. Haven't really ventured out of the state. I mean, obviously done a lot of travel, but always lived in this area. Lucky that Steph, my wife, her family lives just around the corner as well. So we've got a huge amount of support around us with family. Obviously now we've got two kids as well. So that helps a lot.
And so growing up out in that neighbourhood of Mooroolbark, how was it growing up in that area?
Well, it's quite, it's a nice area. I mean, there's a lot of trees, and I suppose there is a bit of freedom. You're not living in the city, so to speak. Um, so there's that opportunity to do a bit of bush bashing, on motorbikes or some, things like that. And also have a little bit of land around. So when I was younger, growing up racing go-karts, we always used to have the go-kart trailer parked, on the property, or we'd have the go-karts in the garage to work on them. So we sort of had that flexibility to be able to, have that space around us, I guess. And also went to school in Mooroolbark as well at Billanook College. The first time I actually drove a go-kart was not around Billanook College basketball court, but a primary school just around the corner. So I reckon if you try to do that in the city, you might get yourself in a bit of strife. So there's probably a bit more freedom out this way.
What that sort of leads us to the next question, and I know the answer to this because I saw you did it on your own podcast the other day. But what was your first car?
Yeah, that was a good little segment on our Parked Up podcast. Make sure you listen, everyone, please. Yeah, I had a Holden Torana GTR XU1, and I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to buy that car because my family have always been in the car industry. So my uncle used to own a couple of Holden dealerships up the country, so just on the border of like Victoria, New South Wales. And this car came up, it got traded in on another car, and it was in really good condition. My uncle sort of recognized that, and he rang my dad and he's like, what do you reckon? Tony's getting his license soon. Would you like this car? And dad's like, absolutely, he would. So yeah, that car there was $12,000, which is a bloody lot of money. Luckily I saved up because I was so eager to get a car. And but when I got that car, we were almost too scared to drive the thing because it was in such good condition. And so we actually had a little, which I didn't sort of let on the podcast, but had like a little Rodeo Ute that I did a lot of my thrashing around in. So that's sort of what I learnt more, I suppose, learnt how to drive early on. But the XU1 was actually my first car that I'd purchased. We kept that car for about a year or so, did a few things to it. And the opportunity came up to sell it, which we did. But in hindsight now, we probably should have kept hold of it because they're worth a fortune these days. I mean, I made a nice little penny on it, which got me into the next car. But, typical, I should have held on to it. And if I knew now, if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have kept it. So anyway, that was probably the rare occasion you make money on a car. Yeah, I don't think I recognize the value of it and what it really meant to a lot of people. I always remember pulling up to uh, a memory that I've got, pulling up to get a video shop. That's how long ago it was. When they used to actually sell videos and DVDs and all sorts of things, or loan them out like Video Busters. And like I went inside to get what I wanted, come back out, and there's just people all around this car looking at it and admiring it, I guess. So it was in really nice condition. It's just it started to get a little bit of rust. So, but again, hindsight, probably should have just fixed it instead of flogging it off. But anyway, it's gone now.
And so you mentioned the rodeo that you had. Was that like the family truckster
Mm.
that you just jumped in and would use as a more of a daily kind of rig?
Yeah, in our family, we've always had a little ute handy. Dad's still got a little rodeo. It's not the same one, but yeah, this was just a manual rodeo that I actually learned to drive in. So learn how to change gears and all that sort of stuff. And it's literally a car that sat in the driveway if we needed to go to the tip or anything like that. That's what would get used. And we had that car for a long time, a long time. Even um, when I was racing, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but racing in development series, we used to take our own support vehicle. And I remember we modified that ute to fit into the truck because it was a little bit too high. So we actually like cut down the leaf spring so it sit nice and low, and we altered the roll hoop on the tray. So it was basically just in line with the of the roof, just to get it in the truck, and it just made it. So we had that ute for a lot of years, and then we ended up getting rid of that, and then we've got a newer Rodeo, which the reason we did that was because the old one had no power steering, no air conditioning. Like it was really old school. So we decided to upgrade and get one with air conditioning and power steering. So awesome.
And back in the days then, who actually taught you to drive?
Um, so dad did most of the time. I remember mum came out a few times with me, but she was always pretty nervous and she didn't really add a lot to it other than just sitting there in case we got pulled over and, I had somebody with me driving. But she was so nervous that it wasn't enjoyable. Like she didn't trust me whatsoever, even though I wasn't really going crazy. But because I was doing karting at the time and other racing, I did a lot of my driving miles that you need to do, or hours, going to and from racetracks. So not only was I driving during the day, but then you'd jump back in the car and get some hours up as well. So dad did most of it. I think I still got a driving instructor to spend a little bit of time with me before the test. Because you know what it's like. You're not really learning how to drive a car as such. You're learning how to pass the test and just to know what they really needed from you and what to expect on the day. So I think I did a few, like probably a month or so with this guy, regular lessons. And then, yeah, went for my license. And I think I rolled back slightly on a takeoff. It got some points deducted, but all right.
You've already sort of mentioned that you had already been racing at that time. So when did you start
Yeah.
racing? Obviously, you've touched on the fact that it was go-karts. How old were you then?
Yeah, it all started because my dad and his brothers had been involved in car racing or cars in general, whether it be driving or repairing or prepping race cars. So it's always sort of been in our blood a little bit, but dad was doing some karting himself prior to me being old enough to go karting. And he was doing it out at Whittlesea kart track, which is like, I'm not sure if you know it, but it was a really tiny kart track. It was like 15 or 16 seconds a lap. I'm not even joking. It might have been 20, but it was so tiny, this track. You could barely pass anyone because it was so short. So yeah, dad was just doing club day stuff, really. He did a little bit of other stuff, nothing too serious. He's running his own business at the time as well. So between, kids and business and racing, like it was just flat out. And then he decided to get me or introduce me to it. And what he did was, and I mentioned before about driving around the basketball court, but he literally had one of his old go-karts and he chopped a section out of it in the middle and shortened it so I could, I could reach the pedals. So I didn't get a fancy new go-kart or anything like that to begin with. It was literally like, let's see if you like it. And then if you do, we'll see what the next step is. So I had this go-kart that had been chopped down. even the seat had been chopped in the middle and just like sandwiched together and refiberglass. So it was so tight on me, like it held me in really well. So that was my first go-kart. Got to drive around the basketball court for a little bit, got used to it.
How old were you?
And then I think I was probably about 7 at that time, but I didn't race until I was 8. So I did probably a good half a year of practice. I'd just come out with Dad when he was testing and just run around, and he really didn't pay a lot of attention. He literally just pushed me out there. I'd circulate and then come back in, and that's all it was at that time. So then I started racing when I was 8, and I think at the time that was probably as young as you could be to get your license. So I don't think you could be a lot younger. There was some reason why I started then. Anyway, so I started on P's. My first race meeting, I finished 5th in the last race, I think it was, or 5th overall. And I remember getting Dad to wait until the end of presentations to see whether they gave a trophy to 5th place, which they didn't. Not even a reward or anything, or a encouragement award. So anyway, so we did that, and then I sort of spent the next probably good year, maybe even 2, not really progressing that much. So I was really just doing club stuff, and Dad was still trying to race. His business was really busy at the time as well, and it got to the point where it was like, right, well, we're not getting anywhere here. Are we going to give it a bit more of a crack, or are we going to step back from it? And I wanted to, go further with it. So then Dad was happy to stop racing himself. So he never really thought of himself as a racing driver or anything like that. He loves tinkering on it, preparing the go-kart or the car, like that process. So he was happy to step aside. And then as soon as he did, and there was a bit of focus on my racing, I just went so much better. Like, I'm not going to say that I went and won everything, but my results improved heaps straight away. So from then on, it was like, okay, well, we're going okay. We can maybe win a few races or trophies or whatever, and we took it a little bit more serious. So I reckon I was probably more that 9 or 10 when it started to get a little serious than just mucking around, really.
What do you think was the difference then when he stopped racing that gave you that more performance? Was it that you became the focal point when you were at the track, or was it that he then was tinkering with your kart and making it better, or was it, what was the change?
I think there's an element of that, like, so he'd probably spend a bit more time actually tuning the kart for me, or the engine, probably not spending the money on his stuff. So he started spending money on mine. Might be finding better motors or carbies, or, just maybe I was pretty young at the time, but, getting that new go-kart that I needed, or actually the go-kart that I should have rather than just a chopped down one. So yeah, there was just a lot more focus on what I was doing, and he spent a lot more time explaining like the lines and why you position the car in a particular spot. Always remember him standing out on the track, going closer, 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 or out sort of thing, trying to get me in that right spot on the circuit, and just trying to understand it. Because yeah, you can go and do that at the track you go to every single weekend or every couple of weeks, but then to try and go to different tracks and know what lines you're meant to use. So I needed that foundation, I guess, and that's what he was trying to teach me. I remember even like wet days, like Dad would stand out there in his dry as a bone, trying to get me to, because in the J class, or like midgets and rookies, in the wet, you generally you'd hold throttle most of the time, and you just ride the brake. And he was trying to teach me how to do that, and the amount of times I would spin off, because I'd have too much throttle on or whatever it is. So I just remember those days. They were absolutely miserable for him, but I was trying to learn how to drive in the wet, and we all know sort of how important that can be, and feeling comfortable in those conditions. So there's certainly a lot of work from him back in the day to get me up to speed. And I suppose it's like anything though, like whether you're going into a new career or you're studying to be a lawyer or whatever it is, you've got to learn the fundamentals to start with and actually understand why you do this or that. So that was the driving academy, so to speak. And it's so different to other sports where you'd have like a driver coach. I've got my dad that really didn't do a huge amount of racing himself, and he'll be the first to admit he never really, he didn't win titles or anything like that. He was just a club racer that just enjoyed tinkering on his go-kart.
And so at that stage, did you have goals in terms of the driving, or was it just go and enjoy your go-karting, and if you're winning and stuff like that? You weren't thinking then Formula One and those sorts of things?
Nah, not at all. Absolutely not at all. Not at that age. I remember the first time that I thought to myself, I want to be a racing driver, is I was about probably 13 or 14, and we went to Phillip Island and watched a supercar race. And I remember standing at on top of the pits there. We've been up there quite a few times, and watching a start, and all the cars are bouncing off the limiter. It's so noisy. There's so much. It's so raw, that sound, and the light goes out. They take off down the straight, and I remember turning to Dad, and we just had like a grin from ear to ear. Like, this is what we want to do. Like, it was like a light bulb moment. Like, yep. Yeah, probably was about 13 or 14, I reckon, before we really started to hone in on, okay, what is the next step? How do we, go from just sort of doing club stuff and a few state titles and bits and pieces to actually like mapping out a path of what we're setting out to achieve. So, like I never went to seniors in go-karts. I stayed in juniors. So I only went up to junior clubman, and I did a little bit of JICA, as they call it, which is like a reed valve sort of junior class, which travel around the country. That was about as serious as it got. And then as soon as I was old enough to get my CAMS license, which was 16, then I jumped into Formula Ford. So we just thought, well, we've spent, almost 10 years or 8 years in go-karts now. There's probably not a huge amount more we can learn on a go-kart front. We've got goals a little bit beyond that. So why keep spending money on just, basically grabbing trophies? So and as you know, I mean, it's just such an expensive game. And we'd come from go-karting where you're spending, let's say, $20,000 or $30,000 a year, maybe, probably more. I don't know. Dad obviously spent the money. To then, I remember going to buy. We went and bought a Formula Ford, and that was like $40,000. This thing, and I was like, God, this is getting a bit serious straight away. So yeah, that was. I mean, that's cheap these days, but it was like a big eye opener. It was like, far out. We're gonna have to try and get some sponsors or do something here.
And so that was just state series that you jumped in Formula Ford, and then moved along from there. How did all that progress?
Yeah, that was. So I jumped into Formula Ford and did state series, just Victorian state series. The Formula Ford that we bought was actually Jamie Winkup's car that he'd done the national series in. So we knew the Winkups through karting and all that. They were trying to run their own show, and they had a Magal chassis, and they always kept it prepped and looking, $1 million. They I don't know if they spent a lot of money on it, but they prepped it really nicely. It was a really nice car, that one. So we went and bought that car, and Jamie went and joined Sonic at the time, and obviously realized that doing your own things is a little bit tricky. But we'd always, as a family, we'd prepped our own go-karts. We were going to prep our own Formula Ford. We were going to learn all about it. And that's the way we did it. And I remember the Formula Ford getting moved into one of Dad's factories at work, because obviously it's getting a little bit big for the garage at home. And after school, I would go and change the ratios or, try and prep some of it myself. But in, like, I think it was year 10 or 11, you'd have sport on a Wednesday. And instead of doing sport in the afternoon on a Wednesday, We had a mechanic working for us at the time, prepping this thing, and just part time, but he'd help us on the weekends and when we weren't testing. And he'd come pick me up from school and take me to Calder Park, and then I'd spend the afternoon at Calder Park testing in the Formula Ford. And Dad would drive the trailer to Calder. He'd be ready to go. Like I literally just pull my helmet on and all that sort of stuff, and out I'd go. So it was that was sort of my introduction to it at Calder. The first time I drove the Formula Ford at Calder, I remember going down the straight, coming past where basically the pit lane sort of exit is, and rolling out of the throttle and thinking, where is turn one here? Like it's, as you know, it's miles down the road, but I'd already been flat out for ages. And you got to remember, like obviously coming from karts, their straight might be, I don't know, a couple 100 meters, and then suddenly we've got like a kilometer and a bit. So, I mean, obviously going a bit faster, but so I did a lot of testing at Calder in the lead up to my first race, I guess, because part of the Victorian State Series was at Calder back then. That was one of the rounds. So I did State Series that year. I did a couple of national rounds, just Victorian ones. And then we decided to try and put a bit of a plan together for the following year to do national. So we put a plan together to do national, the Australian Series. And with the same car, we're going to run the Mygale again because that's what I was used to. So it was sort of like quite quick, 1 year in Victorian State Series, and then we're going to try and tackle the National Series. And I got into that year, did a couple of races, and then we actually got an opportunity to join the Holden Young Lions team, which was John Faulkner was running that team in development series. So at the time, we were all starry-eyed. We were like, "You're kidding, aren't you?" Like, Rick Kelly, Todd Kelly, all these guys that have come out of Holden Young Lions, they're going to be stars, And we absolutely got, what's the word? We got not talked into it, but we were starstruck. There's no doubt about it. And we ended up like abandoning our plan. And we jumped at this opportunity to drive in the Holden Young Lions team, run by John Faulkner, and there's all this promise of Holden Racing Team equipment. It was like a 2-year program we were going to do. I mean, that's where we wanted to end up. So it's like, okay, well, great, let's do it. I suppose the less time we spend going around in circles and spending our money, hopefully, it's going to shorten the time you're actually putting your hand in your pocket. You're going to get to supercars and get paid, and it's all going to be great. But unfortunately, that didn't really work out that well in the Holden Young Lions. It was nothing like we thought it was, and it was basically like John Faulkner had his equipment from when he was racing full time, and he needed a home for that equipment, and we were just using all his old cars and equipment, and it was just like, I remember my first race, the thing just breaking down, and it was a shit show, really, to be honest.
So as much as there was a Holden Young Lions label, there was no real support, and like you didn't have all the best product and things like that.
No, the support wasn't there, and from what we were promised, we were going to have HRT gear, and at the time HRT were the leading supercar team by a mile. And as I mentioned earlier, we were Holden dealers. We had this Holden sort of connection. Dad and his brothers have always had a passion for Holden. So it was like, how good is this? One of our own is going to race for effectively under the factory banner. This is a dream come true. So, yeah, we jumped at. I did I think 3 or 4 races with them, and we had a couple of good results. I remember like we finished 5th at Mallala, and I think we were like in the 10 at Bathurst, things like that. We wasn't terrible, but it was more there was a lot of conflict in the background between John Faulkner and my family, and that was sort of probably affecting me in a way, because I knew there was so much unhappiness behind me, and I sort of struggled to focus. And I think some of that comes from we'd spent so much time preparing our own stuff and knowing how everything was prepped, knowing that we're putting out our best foot forward, the best we could, to then trusting somebody else that's probably not really the most trustworthy character, if you know John. And yeah, we just basically didn't believe that we were getting equipment that was up to scratch, really. And I had a lot of learning to do, I know that, but we weren't getting the support we needed. There was certainly no HRT cars coming our way. It was just basically, I don't like to use the word lies, but it was, the truth wasn't as transparent, I guess. You know, like it was just all a bit of rubbish chat. So it was myself and Dale Breed.
Okay.
Dale Breed, he was doing it as well. So he was actually really good because he was a little bit older. He was probably my age now, you know, doing development series, and he was happy to help a young guy. Like I was only 16 at the time, maybe 17. He was happy to help, you know, a young bloke because I wasn't really a threat to him as such. So anyway, that finished up that year, and then the following year we decided to join Marty Brandt's team, independent race cars, and he had an ex Larry Perkins car, and I think Mark Porter had raced it the year before when I joined the team, and then the year before that, Dumbrell had actually won the championship in that car. So he ran a really good show, Marty, and still does today. So yeah, we joined those guys, and it was a very different vibe. You know, like we went testing. You know, Marty actually was trying to help me as a racing driver. He sort of knew he was tough, but I felt like he was pretty fair as well. And yeah, we had a much better year that year. And then I did another year in development series, but we sort of changed everything after that. Instead of relying on other people, we wanted to go down our own path. And we'd sort of learnt quite a bit. So I'd sort of done probably a year and a quarter by then of development series. And then we got the opportunity to buy our own HRT car. And this car was, I think it was like the first or second car that HRT had actually sold outside of that sort of fold of either HRT or Kmart Racing, you know. So it was sort of, and that was because the relationship had been built through the family business. So our family business at the time, and it's a little bit different today, but we did all the spray painting for HSV. So all the additional body kit parts that you'd see on a HSV, whether it be a Club Sport, Maloo, whatever, everything that's not a Holden factory item, we would spray paint, assemble, it'd go back to HSV, and they'd put on the car. So we've been working with them for, you know, probably 10, 15 years at the time. Like we had a long relationship. And so HSV is owned by the Walkinshaw family. Same with HRT, Kelly Racing, or Kmart Racing at the time, and Kelly's were in there. So yeah, they trusted us enough, I guess, to offload one of their cars to us. And that was chassis 44. So that car there had one Bathurst with Greg Murphy and Rick Kelly. Wasn't the Lap of the Gods car, but it was, I think it was the following year with the Spider-Man on the side of the Kmart livery, which was really cool. So we bought that. We bought the engine that won Bathurst. And the reason that my dad and his brothers wanted to buy a car that had some history was so at the end of it, once we'd finished, we could actually sell the thing and hopefully get our money back, which did actually eventuate because it had such rich history, that car. But yeah, anyway, I did development series that following year in that car that year, and that was a good year. There was Canto was in it, Luffy, I think Macro, not Tim Macro, Adam Macro. That's how long ago it was. Yeah, we had quite a few podiums in that year, and that was a really, really strong year. So even though it was our first year running our own team, just the equipment was so much better than what I'd had before. So it was a big learning curve, that part of it. But yeah, we definitely saw the results.
Even though you had HRT gear, you didn't actually have any engineering from them or any mechanics from them?
No, we had like setups from them the previous year, and that they'd gone into like a new generation car anyway, so it didn't really matter to them if we had some of that IP. They were still looking after building our motors. I think they were doing our dampers, but we had our own little team together. It was pretty low key. I remember we used to do the work on a Saturday, and it was just all ring-ins, people helping out, like experienced guys, but guys that had done it before and then had stepped back into a full-time job, as we sort of see a lot. Motorsport eventually takes its toll on a lot of people, but they still have this itch to go racing or be part of it. So yeah, we had some support from Walkinshaw, but we basically put together our own little group. And then finally in 2007, we won the championship. Not in that particular car. We upgraded again because it just keeps moving every time. And yeah, won in 2007 and sort of had to deal with Michael Caruso all year. And I think I beat him by 1 point in the end. We had a terrible last round, and he closed the gap. Like, it was touch and go at the end there. But that final round at Phillip Island, you do all the sums, do all the maths, where you got to finish. Let's say Michael wins everything. We're going to finish here, finish there. And then we qualified pretty well. And then in the race, there was Dale Wood, John Webb having this ding dong battle in front of me. Like I think we were third, fourth, and fifth. And Michael had just cleared out, and I didn't really care. I was like, "Oh, I don't need to, I don't need to push. I don't need to take risk. I'm just going to consolidate, whatever." Anyway, so Dale and Jonathan Webb having this big battle. They have it coming together, and I'm like, "Okay, no worries. I'll just go around them." They're into the weeds. Dale fires back off the dirt and comes across and clips the back wheel of my car and just sends me into the fence. Like, he was like not panicking, but he was just in a hurry to get back on track. Didn't realize that I was there or anything, So anyway, I've spun, I've hit the fence, and there are panels hanging off this thing. But as soon as I hit the fence, I literally plucked first and I just went. I did not care. I'm like, I'm out of here. I've got to finish this race. This is my chance. And we were so lucky because there was still quite a few laps to go, and there was panels hanging off the car. And really, I think they should have black flagged us, but they decided not to, and I got away with it. So there's a bit of a repair job the next day or overnight. And I remember Dale coming up to me and trying to talk to me about it. And I could have gone off my brain, but I literally, because I knew that the next day I was going to be around him again, and I didn't want any aggro. So I was like, no, it's fine. Like, it was just a clumsy incident, and trying to pacify everybody. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you fuckhead, you've just taken me out of the race and pretty much almost destroyed my whole championship. So yeah, that I had to bite my lip there. And then the next day, we did enough, won the championship, and the rest is history, I guess. So that was, like, in my career, that was a big moment because we had done it as a family and we'd sort of done it ourselves. And you're up against some big teams, Brad Jones Racing, Tickford at the time, or FPR with Caruso. There was 888, I think, running Luffy's car, or they had part of it. They were sort of doing some of it. I'm probably missing quite a few here. There was Larry Perkins, he had cars in there. So yeah, we were sort of doing it ourselves. We were fortunate that we had, we weren't underfunded or anything like that. A lot of drivers, they hide behind this, oh, we've got no money and all this stuff. And at the time, business was really good for our family, and we weren't spending money for the sake of it. But if the thing needed, new dampers or there was a slightly better damper, whatever, we would spend the money to get the performance out of it. Like, we were trying to do it properly. So we had good equipment, but that's what you're up against. You know, up against these other teams that had that experience. They already had that knowledge. So, you know, you got to go into the fight with the right equipment. And we learnt that early on. And I think every race driver knows, like, you can be driving as good as anybody, but you're only really as good as what's underneath you. And obviously some drivers get more out of it than others, but yeah, we had good equipment and we needed it and we did the job and it was really satisfying. So the thing is, you know, whether you got heaps of dough to spend or not, you got to spend in the right spots.
Yeah.
You know, you see it so many times where rich families come in, they're going to set the world on fire, but they don't have the experience, or they've hooked up with the wrong people, or they get taken for a ride, whatever it is. And we did get taken for a ride, especially in the old young lions phase. That was a big eye opener for us. But anyway, that was that little journey, and it took a little bit longer than what I would have liked. But if I had my time again, I wouldn't have jumped into it so soon.
Mm-hmm.
I would have done more Formula Ford, and I would have learnt the basics and the foundation, because I was trying to develop as a driver. And then you're racing against guys that were older, more established. You know, I had a lot of catching up to do, and it just took probably that 1 or 2 years longer than what we would have liked. But we couldn't go back at that stage. We were sort of pretty committed to our path. And along the way, you know, I'd done in the supercar endurance races with a couple of teams. I'd done it with HSV dealer team in 2006. 2007, I actually did it with Marty Brandt. He was running a car in the main series, the Autobahn car for Steve Owen. That was a Paul Morris car. And I decided, because I actually had an opportunity again to do it with HSV, but there was no future for me there at that point. So the reason I went with Marty was because there was chat about the following year about joining the team, and Rod Nash, who owned that team. So then after we wrapped up the championship, we wanted to go full time. And we did like a joint venture with Rod Nash. So basically he owned the license, because you've got to own a license to go racing, and they're very expensive. So he owned that. He brought the sponsor, and basically we topped up what was missing. So if there was a shortfall and we wanted to buy new shocks or upgrade the engine, whatever, it either had to come out of the budget that Rod was supplying, or we'd put in a little bit more. So it was sort of like a good little introductory to us into the championship, without having to go the whole hog of setting up a full supercar team, which going from development series to main series is just a massive leap. Like, I don't think people actually comprehend it. It's huge. And Rod, you know, he was very good in a way that he'd been in sport a long time. He knew what was needed and what to focus on, what not to focus on. But man, those first couple of years in main series is hard. It's hard. You get beaten around. My first practice session at the Clipsal 500, I remember I got in the way of James Courtney, and instead of just coming past and, you know, letting me know he wasn't happy, like, he punted me out of the way, like, see you later. And it was completely on purpose, because the corner, like, yeah, he had to slow down to because I was in his way, but he made it really obvious. It's like, hey mate, don't do that again. So you get beaten up by these blokes, you know, and you're a young bloke and you're trying to find your feet, and it's tricky. It's really tricky. But that environment really does toughen you up quite a bit. You know, you're racing so regularly, the intensity is so high, much higher than what you've ever experienced. In like Dunlop series or development series, you'd qualify well, get the start, get into position, and basically, you know, get into a rhythm. And just, you know, if you had an opportunity to pass, you'd push a bit harder, but the intensity just wasn't there. like it is in main series, you know, with pit stops, strategy, longer distance races. So you physically, you know, buggered. So there's a massive amount of learning to do in the main series. And that's why you see a lot of rookies come in and they really shine in their first year. Again, if I had my time, instead of running our own show, I would have rather have gone into a team that was a well-oiled machine, you know, because not only was I trying to learn, the team was trying to learn. It was a massive learning curve for everybody. And it took, again, longer than what it probably should.
Yeah, I'm fascinated a little bit in the way that the paddock accepted you at that level as well. So you've been in development series for a couple of years, and then you step into the main game, and the paddock in the main game is a very different beast in itself as well. The way that they all, you know, there's a different type of camaraderie compared to development series and everything. So how was that when you're going into that and all of a sudden you're the young guy coming up, you've got a championship belt over your shoulder, but it's in the development series. How do they accept that? How do they integrate you into their world?
I think, you know, and it might just be in your own head. It probably is to begin with, but they see you as the rich kid coming in. Honestly, you know, you own your own team. You know, like you're buying race cars and you all this stuff. You must be just so wealthy, and you can't drive because you've got money, and all this sort of, you know, thoughts. And you see this in a lot of categories. If you're struggling to make the grid for funding, you must be a good driver. If you're flush with cash and you're rocking up in a jet, you got no chance of being a good driver. You know, like there's that sort of perception around it. So, like anything though, you do have to earn your stripes. You can't just come into a new category and a professional sporting category and expect to have respect from other drivers around you and teams. You have to prove yourself, and that's what I set out to do, and that's what we tried to achieve. And like, I honestly think when I look back on it now, for a small team, we were regularly in the 10, in shootouts. Like I'm a spectator now for a lot of the supercar stuff, obviously just do the enduros, but you watch some of these small teams down the back and they don't shift from, you know, 20th. They're just around that range the whole time. Whereas we were able to not consistently, but jump up, you know, into a quality session, or we'd have a good round or a good race or whatever, and just, I suppose, show that we were capable. And trying to have that consistency is the trickiest thing. But I think a lot of that as well comes from really understanding what makes the car tick, what you need from it at different circuits. It's all good to sort of snag a setup, but then you don't know why you're actually going that fast. So, but it just takes, like, I really think you do have to earn your stripes in the category, and you probably got to ruffle some feathers as well. And I always remember the first year I went to Darwin, and Van Gisbergen was behind me in one of the races, and I think we were about 8th or 9th in the race, and he was that hard into the back of me every lap, trying to get around, just trying to unsettle me. We managed to beat him in that race, and afterwards he sideswiped me after the flag because he was so pissed off and angry. But I sort of had to do it, you know, like if I just let him go, then he knew that that's what he could do to get around me. And like, I've never really been one of those drivers that are sort of hard-assed, or I probably need to be a bit tougher on track. It's just not my nature. But I think, you know, if you want to be at that top level, you do have to have a little bit about that. You not be too worried about upsetting somebody else on the track, because you might be mates off track, but then when you're on track, you sort of got to have that killer instinct. And early on, I reckon it's hard to separate the two, because you're trying so hard to fit in with the group and have the respect from them, that you don't want to upset them on track because you want them to like you off track. So it's a real balance.
And along those same lines, so you mentioned the Courtney thing at Clipsal, Van Gisbergen in there, and what about like if you're in the driver's briefing or whatever, does any of them sort of pipe over your shoulder and give you a little bit of a chirping in the ear, or when you're walking past them in the paddock or something? Is there any sort of sledging going on in that regard, or is it pretty much on track is hard ball, and then off track it's all whatever happens is all done on the track?
More on track, but like outside of that, when you do like signing sessions or driver's briefing, whatever, they're all pally and in their little groups, and they're not happy to let you into that group. So you just sort of be standing there by yourself, or like a little bit of a loner. It takes a bit of time to sort of get into the group, I guess. But that didn't worry me so much, that really didn't worry me. I mean, I've had run-ins with some of the, bigger names in the category, like Courtney, for instance, or, Garth, for instance, all the time, like he'd say things like, oh, you really, you're spending your inheritance, like if you have a crash or you come together with him, whatever. It's like, you're doing a good job of getting rid of that inheritance, aren't you? So they play all these games though. He's one of the worst, Garth Tander. It's funny because I think he actually likes me. I think deep down he likes me, but we've had that many run-ins on track that you'd think that he didn't. So anyway, whatever. I honestly think that you can't sort of force that stuff, I mean, you don't need to like everybody that you come across, but if you've got that level of respect, but there's always going to be people that you just don't like, really.
Yeah, we're just getting to that point where you've moved into the main game. You've got the Rod Nash connection, but then you actually developed your own. You like everything. You've gone back to wanting to do it all yourself again.
Yeah, I mean, we felt that we had enough knowledge at the time, and I suppose connections and relationships, I should say, to do our own thing. And again, we did go back to our roots of, preparing our own cars, being the master of our own destiny. So yeah, I think it was 2010 when we decided to do that. But it was very much, it had to be like a stepping stone because, we had to buy our own license. So when we went into the main series, we had that partnership, and we had to get a little bit of equipment to, I suppose, upgrade our team to be able to deal with pit stops and, the other challenges of full-time racing. So it's just all bit by bit. So even though we had the Rod Nash relationship for 2 years, then that following year we decided to do our own thing when we bought our own license. But back then, believe it or not, you could get enough sponsorship to run those cars and not have to put a lot into your own pocket. So although you had, the investment in a license and maybe a truck and a car and bits and pieces like that you can sell, the actual running costs were always covered by television rights. So that was one of the big things. So with Rod, the agreement that we had was he kept all the television money. He gave us the sponsorship that he had, which was the Bottle sponsorship. But the television money back then was, $800,000 or $900,000. So we bought a license, I think, for 1.2, but you're getting $800,000 or $900,000 back straight away that year. So it just made sense to us. There's a license that came up, and we thought, well, we might as well do that. It just made complete sense for us to finally, I suppose, make that next little jump. That was in 2010. We had some sponsorship from Wilson Security as well. It was only a smaller amount that year. The following year, it was a full car, naming rights sponsor, and we ran David Wall in that car as well in the development series. So sort of ran not two cars, but one in the main game, one in the development series. But yeah, the theory behind it, I suppose, was just to take control again. We had the relationship with Walkinshaw Racing. I think when there's other parties involved, like Rod, not that we had a bad relationship, but they've got slightly different agendas. They want to go on different paths, and there comes a time when it's just, time to do your own thing or move away or whatever. So that was that year, 2010. we decided to take that next little step, and we had a really good year that year. Our results didn't suffer whatsoever. We did quite a few shootouts. I remember my first shootout that year was at Adelaide for the first round of the year. We just bought a license, got into the shootout, went down after qualifying. Before the shootout, I went down to the garage of HRT, and Garth was there. And I said to Garth, so what do you do? Like, what do you do on a shootout lap? Like, how do you warm your tires up? What's involved? Just had no idea. So he ran me through it all. And the Walkinshaw cars back in those days were really good on street circuits. So yeah, we qualified really well, had a really good weekend that weekend. And it sort of went from there. We sort of continued. I think we made about 5 shootouts that year, which it's not all about getting in shootouts, but it shows that we're capable of it, and you all know, like in the race, there's so many variables, so many things that happen. But to have speed, that was a real big tick for our team. So yeah, I think we still probably only finished maybe 16th or something in the championship. It probably wouldn't have been amazing, but still for a single car operation, we're pretty happy with that.
And that year with the relationship with HRT, it was quite close, wasn't it? You had not only their cars and engines and things, but didn't you also have a bunch of engineers and mechanics from their team as well?
Yeah, it wasn't a bunch. We had Jason Bush. He was full-time with Walkinshaw Racing, but he would look after me on race weekends and test days. So effectively, we were running as a 5th car for them. And yeah, he would bring all his knowledge across. I think that really helped, to be honest, have somebody with their background. Jason had been with Walkinshaw for many, many years. He'd been with them through championships, and he knew everything was going on in the background. You weren't getting any filtered information. It was the information that you needed. And I remember that year with the Bundaberg cars were like the Kelly Racing, the Kmart sort of second tier of HRT running under them. And they had Fabian Coulthard and Andrew Thompson running in those 2 cars. And it was like a bit of a battle between our little team and those cars, because we had very similar equipment. And in the end, Fabian and I had quite a few run-ins, because it was quite a bit of pressure who was going to be better on the day. And he was his first year at Walkinshaw, and I think he was sort of feeling, maybe a little bit insecure at times about, or maybe not insecure, but like he felt a little threatened, put it that way. We, in the same equipment, we were punching quite high, and ended up being a little bit of a battle there at Hamilton. They had a street circuit there, and I ended up bloody turning Fabs around because I wasn't real happy with him. And then I think it was like the next round at Winton, he turned me around, and it was dramas. And the big drama was, we're actually part of the relationship with Walkinshaw was not only engineering, but I had joined their drivers in their fitness program. So I had the same fitness trainer, and we met every morning, like 5 days a week. It'd be like, we're swimming, we're cycling, we're running, we're gym, whatever. So, Fabs takes me out at Winton, and then the next day we're sitting at the pools about to go swimming. It was awkward as. So I remember the trainer ringing me that morning. It's very ironic now because of the relationship we have, and it's very different these days. But I remember the trainer ringing me that morning going, come on, I've got to put it all aside and we'll have a chat about it. And he not only was a trainer, but he used to, he's a psychologist as well. So he was working with all of us prior to race meetings and preparing us mentally and all these strategies. And Anthony was very good at all that sort of stuff. So when you start to get into some of these bigger teams, you realize the work that's going on in the background. It's not just because they've got a better engine or better mechanic or whatever. They're trying to tick every box. They're trying to cover every base. And I think that Not just the car preparation and trying to get a new engineer on board. Like I was trying to find, I suppose, more of myself and be more consistent as an athlete.
Yeah. And that's that holistic approach that's required. It's not just one thing. There's so many little things all coming together, and even the little things have little things that make them up. And that's the detail that the bigger teams have the ability to go into those details because of the resources and things.
Exactly.
How long did you guys run your own car
I had
for?
the same car that I started full-time in, full-time series that we bought. So as a VE Commodore, I ran that for 3 years. And then at the end of that time, so that brought us into 2010. We did the 2010 championship in that car. And then that car was pretty tired by then. Like, it had done quite a bit of racing. Like, it had done some stuff at HRT, and then obviously 3 years of me bloody bending the thing into a banana half the time. Fighting, punting Babs off and James Courtney and all these boys. So anyway, we were looking for a new car, and we weren't 100% happy with how the relationship was going at Walkinshaw. There was different people at the top, and we didn't feel like we were really quite getting what we needed. I mean, I don't like having conspiracy theories or anything like that, but the way it felt was in 2010 when we had Jason on board and we started doing good things and really matched their team. It got to a point in the year where suddenly a lot of the information started to dry up, and it actually became really uncomfortable for Jason because he still wanted to. I mean, at the end of the day, his name is on my car as the engineer, and he's trying to prove himself all the time. But he had his hands tied. There's no doubt about it that he started to get some restriction from Walkinshaw. And we knew that, and he didn't say it in those words, but it was pretty obvious that he was stressed. He wanted to try and do the right thing by us, but he couldn't because the guys paying his bills were telling him not to. And anyway, so we didn't like that too much. So we looked for a new relationship at the end of that year, and we actually ended up getting into a Tickford car. So we bought a FPR car, and that was Stephen Richards' car that he'd raced. I think 2010 was his last year, maybe 2009. But anyway, that car was in their fold, and we just became a customer there. So at the time, Dave Reynolds was there, Winterbottom, and they really looked after it as well, like really, really well. We were brought into all their debriefs, pre-briefs, everything. We'd travel to the workshop. We'd basically just be part of it. It was all very open. So we had a really good run with those guys. We ran that car for 2 years, and that was with Wilson Security sponsorship, and then we had Highflex mobile hose service on the car for the following year, and then Car of the Future was brought in. And by this time, like, funding the program was getting really hard, really tricky, because television money was just decreasing year on year, and sponsorship is getting a bit tougher. I think with just to take it back a little bit, when we had the Walkinshaw car, we used to have funding from Holden as well. And Holden used to put a windscreen banner on all their Holdens out there. So every time you saw a Holden in the field, it had a Holden windscreen banner, and that was 250 grand, just that banner. And I remember when, even my first year in main series, I said, "Oh, do you want that paid now, or you want that paid over the year?" We had to buy a car and all sorts of stuff. So I was like, "Well, okay, can we have that now?" But all that stuff was drying up. Like Holden were only supporting HRT. Ford were only supporting Tickford. I think probably at that time they might not even been sort of involved in the sport that much anymore. So you lose manufacturer support, television money, and it all starts to become quite difficult. But then Car of the Future came in, and we decided to give it, another crack and see if we could make it all work financially. And I know there's like a lot of chat about the financial side of it, but because it was our own team, I was obviously in amongst it all. I wasn't just the driver that was rocking up just to drive. I had to try and find money, build relationships with sponsors and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of learning to do there. But so actually in 2013, am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, 2013 Car of the Future. Yep. We actually went back to Walkinshaw, which was a bit of a surprise, and there's a lot of reasons behind it. It actually been taken over by another guy, and we were a lot more comfortable with the way he went about it. And again, Dad's business in the background still had a really strong relationship with Walkinshaw. So even though we'd moved our race team to supporting another team, it didn't really affect the business side so much. So we were still interacting with those guys. We knew what they're up to. So then, we ended up buying Walkinshaw car, and the Car of the Future was a really expensive period. Like, you're not only just buying a car, there was, gearboxes, wheels, like it was like a whole new world. And then you have to sort of offload all your old stuff as well. So it wasn't just a little upgrade, that one really hurt. And that year, the television money, we got $30,000. So you think about $30,000.
800,000 down to 30. Wow.
Well, it had been slowly going down. But so you had the changeover to Car of the Future, which was very, very expensive exercise. Losing the television money to basically nothing. So that year was really quite tricky. It was tough. It was tough. But in saying that, it was probably the best year that I had in supercars. And I think Walkinshaw came out with a pretty good product in the Car of the Future. They had a car on track at least 6 months before we went racing, and they were testing that, trying to develop it for the Holden side of things. So they had probably a bit of a head start on some of the other teams. But that year we partnered up again with Walkinshaw, and we're a fourth car. So they had the HRT cars, they had Russell, Ingle in the super cheap car, and they had our car all pitting together, and we'd debrief, we'd do everything together. So it wasn't like, oh, you're a fifth car down there, like come and see us, sometimes, like don't bother us basically. We were in amongst the whole thing. So it was really, really good. And basically by the end of that year, we just didn't have the funds to continue. We had to make a decision. It was starting to really hurt the family business, and that we never wanted to get to the point where it was hurting the family business. We were happy to put a bit of money in if we were making money, but when it was that sort of money, it was like, man, this is getting ridiculous. Like, what are we doing this for? And I felt, to be honest, that I'd done enough myself to prove to other teams that, I could be a worthy contender of a seat. Maybe it would mean that my family couldn't be as involved, but, we'd been through that, and it was time for me to do my own thing probably and leave the coop, so to speak. So I tried down that path, like once our team couldn't get going, and there was a couple of little chats here and there. Probably the best one, or the closest I got, was joining Gary Rogers the following year. Some other kid got it. I don't know if you've heard of him, but Scotty Mack, he took the seat, bloody prick. No, so there was a bit of a chat there about trying to join those guys, and they had like good cars in that first phase of Car of the Future. So that would have been good for me. I felt like I had 5 years under my belt. It was probably hard to the series. I knew what to expect. I was basically ready to go, very much so. But anyway, that didn't eventuate. So I ended up joining Walkinshaw as a co-driver, and that was with Tim Slade for 2 years. Did that, And then after that, Slady, he went to BJR, and I had the opportunity to go with Slady to BJR, and but Scotty Pye was needed a co-driver at DJR Team Penske, and I just literally floated the idea with Scott and said, "Hey, what do you reckon?" And he was like, "Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, just email this guy." And I'm like, "Okay, who's this guy?" And it's Ryan Story. Okay, so I just emailed him and said, "What do you reckon?" And it literally just came about really quick, really, really quick. So I have to really thank Scotty Pye for my introduction to the team, and otherwise, I probably would have gone to BJR, to be honest, and I'd probably still be there with those guys. Because
Penske involved at that point, or was that just still the end of DJR as it was?
nah, Penske were involved. It was when they were only running one car that year, and the following year is when Fabian came on board, and they went to two cars and really sort of got a bit more serious. So that year, but yeah, I didn't know obviously the success, but I just thought I could go with Slady to BJR, and that would be great. Or I could, again, probably try and stay on my own 2 feet a little bit and try and further my career a little bit. I thought that it was going to be a better option down the track to go with DJR, and it was a bit of left field. I think everyone probably just assumed I was just going to join Slady and just go down that path. It's a Holden team, similar cars to what I've been driving, but I sort of went complete opposite and took the risk to go to DJR. And yeah, I suppose it's that for me was like a big tick for me, like a big feather in my cap that I was able to actually, and the same with Walkinshaw as well, because they weren't looking for somebody with any funding or anything. It was like they're looking for the right person for the job. And same with DJR and now DJR Team Penske, they could have anybody down the pit lane. If you don't fit their mold, like they can replace you, no problem. There's that many people wanting to drive for them, and money doesn't talk with those guys. So they literally will select you if they think you're the right fit. So yeah, I think to begin with, it was more probably Scotty Pye that got me involved. But then, since then, I guess I've molded into what they want, and I've been able to stay there for the last 5 years. So that I'm pretty proud of that, though, to be involved with Penske and to know what they've achieved, and the team. They're obviously still going through, but they've just been through a real purple patch, and to be part of that in some way is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you should really be quite proud of the achievement of being, like, even though you're an endurance driver, not a full-time driver, to be picked at that level in those levels of teams and to be paid to do what you do at that level is quite phenomenal, because as you and I know, and not many people probably understand this, but in motorsport, there are still a lot of guys even down the full-time grid that are actually paying to be there. And you're not having to do that. You're getting paid. And so just to dovetail towards the end of the chat about your actual racing experience, because during these last 5 years or whatever, you've actually had the opportunity of racing in quite a number of different cars across a number of different categories. So just a quick overview, not into too much detail, just a quick overview on the other things you've been behind the wheel of in those recent years.
Yeah, I mean, my aim and goal has always been to be as prepared as I can be for some of these, or for the supercar races, and not that it's within a contract or anything like that, that you have to be racing, but I like to do as much as I can outside of it. So, yeah, I mean, I have been very lucky to drive some really cool cars, especially some of the GT cars. So I raced with Maranello Motorsport for a little while, and they're a Ferrari team. So the 458 Ferrari, the 488 Ferrari, which is $1 million car. That thing was just amazing. But had quite a bit of success in the Mercedes-Benz and with Max Twig. And Scott Taylor Motorsport as well. So that car is just a beautiful car. Like it looks good, sounds good, and it drives just as good as it sounds. So love that car. Also been doing a couple of races with Adrian Dietz in the Lambo. A couple of international sort of events. Last year we went to Suzuka. Only had the anniversary the other day. I can't believe it's been a year already. And then, last year I did TCR, which is obviously a new category to Australia with Honda. So racing a Honda Civic in that one. And it's been a big learning curve, front wheel drive car. No one's got any info. I mean, a lot of these categories that you're racing over here, people have been racing them for years. And although you might not have, they've got previous data and stuff they can sort of go off, and they're in a really nice window with the car. But this TCR stuff has just been a big learning curve last year. But yeah, to have Honda on board, and we finished second in the championship last year, which was pretty good, I think, considering, the guys that are in it, guys and girls. Chelsea did a few races too. It's almost like a up and comer category in many ways. So I feel like one of the old blokes. I'm sort of like in the middle, because you had Jason Bright in there and a couple of the older guys. Garth was doing a few races. I'm not quite as old as them, but the difference in the racing between the GT stuff and even supercar enduros, it's all about just being consistent, not taking risk and things like that. Whereas TCR is sprint races, short sprint races. So it was like reprogramming my brain in some ways. I had to go hard and make moves and fight, and it was just really quite intense. So I reckon it sharpened me up quite a bit. So, COVID this year, I mean, I haven't driven a race car since February, and going straight to the Bathurst 1000 in about 3 weeks. So least amount of prep I've ever done for the Bathurst 1000. But everyone's in the same boat, I guess. Like, that's just the way it is.
You mentioned a moment ago that you did get to race Suzuka last year. Have you done any other races overseas?
We did Abu Dhabi, Bahrain in supercars, and also did Texas in the supercar. But outside of that, I haven't. I've just spent most of my time doing the stuff in Australia. But like when I was younger, I never really wanted to. I never really want to chase going overseas and leave my family or anything like that. I just didn't have that ambition. So it's nice to tick off some of those other tracks now, like a Suzuka. I'd love to do Spa, something like that, that you play on PlayStation all the time. Be nice, or see Formula One cars driving around. It'd be really cool to actually go and experience that. I don't know whether I'll get that opportunity or not. We'll just have to sort of see what happens. I mean, this COVID stuff has just made a huge difference to the whole landscape of the world. But I think motorsport is going to be really affected going forward. Like, how do you go and ask a company for money, for sponsorship, when companies are literally barely surviving at the moment? Like, it's the first thing that gets cut all the time. So it's tricky. It's tricky.
And that's not even accounting for the travel issues that COVID has caused as well.
I'm having enough trouble getting to Sydney.
Across now towards the driver training side of things, and it's something I know you've been a part of for quite a number of years, but give us a quick outline on how you got started in driver training and what some of the experiences you've had in driver training.
I've been driver trained now for, I reckon, 10 or 12 years. So I've been around the traps a little while. It's actually a funny story how I got started in it. So David Reynolds was doing some driver training. Now, you know David really well. You know exactly what he's like. And he literally can't give a shit about doing driver training. And he was working for Rod Wilson. And Rod had like a Maserati program going on. And they were traveling all around the country and burning up tires and, doing this Maserati program. It was Dave, there was Luke Yulden, Dean Canto. I think that was it. It was like a small crew. Anyway, Dave couldn't be bothered doing an event. And so he rang me and said, "Hey, what do you reckon? Do you want to do it?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do it." Like, how good. I'm like, how much do you get paid? And he told me, I'm like, you're kidding, aren't you? You get paid that much to do what you're talking about, like go and hang out in these cool cars. And I remember those days. You do burnouts at the end of the day, just tear the tires off the thing and doing hot laps. Like not like we do now. It's all like we don't want to hear tire squeal or anything like that. Like this was how sideways can you get and how much tire can you destroy. So yeah, a huge amount of fun. But yeah, Dave got me involved, and then he never wanted to come back to it. So I just sort of took his place in that little team. So it was me, Luke, and Canto. There might have been someone else. I can't remember.
Wow.
And we'd travel all over the country doing it. And not that it was my full-time sort of gig at the time, but I was sort of balancing that in the racing. So it was like, oh, well, that's fine. It's only been probably since I haven't been full-time that I've taken it a little bit more seriously. And I suppose, working with a lot of other groups, so I really do enjoy the driving training side of it, because it does actually make, as a racing driver, you do a lot of stuff you instinctively drive, like you turn the wheel here, you push the throttle there, you brake here, you release the pedal. It's all basically information you're getting from your backside. But to break it down and actually try and teach that to somebody, I think it actually makes you think about the process a little bit more. So I think that's a good trait to have, and good experience. But then probably the best thing that I like about it is seeing the improvement in the drivers. Like you get in the car with them at the start of the day, even if you've been with them before, but they'll have 2 months out of the seat, and you got to remember it's not natural for them. They might have taken up driving a car around a racetrack at 40 years of age and they've never done it before, so they're missing a lot of those sort of fundamentals at the start. So to see the progression, over the day, them listening to you, taking on your advice, improving their lap time, that's what I really do enjoy. Just to see the smile on their face at the end of the day, they've got something out of it, and they come back next time, and they actually might request to have you go with them again because they've enjoyed their time. So that side of it, I really do enjoy the teaching and coaching, because it is fairly, it's quite easy for a race driver to do that. I suppose if you can communicate with the people, easy enough, but it's all stuff that you could do almost with your eyes closed in many ways. The driving part of it, where they're not looking for the last 10th of a second. We're teaching them lines and I suppose the basics more than that, more so.
Have you got any fun stories out of the driver training experience that you've had?
Probably a few that you can't really say. We have a good time though. I'll tell you a funny story. A good friend of mine, they will remain nameless, went out to a restaurant and they decided to try and eat as much chili as possible. And when my friend had this chili, his face went redder than a tomato. And I thought his head was going to explode. And that friend was you, Dino.
How often do you play that video? Hey?
Mate, that is just so funny. When you are putting that, like grabbing that rice and putting it in your mouth to try and get rid of some temperature. Yeah, when we go away and do these driver training events, we work hard during the day, but we have a really good time because you've got a good crew of people.
Yeah.
People, guys and girls that love sport, like motorsport, they've either been involved in themselves or in varying levels. But at the end of the day, we are fans of the sport. We love to watch the racing on the weekend, or Formula One, or IndyCar, or whatever it is. So you got that, I suppose, bond that you can. Sometimes you got people on the team that are racing against each other at the time, so there's sometimes a bit of animosity between people as well. But we do have fun, and at night time, like that particular time, we set the challenge, and
I even got
you did it. Finally paid you the $50 as well. Yeah.
What a day that was.
So there you go. But you have to agree though. You have to agree. You do, like a lot of my friends now, from not only motorsport, but the driver training, because you spend so much time with them, so much
Yeah.
time traveling around the country at events, supporting each other during the times when you're not feeling up to it, or you've had a bad experience, whatever it might be. They do become, I suppose, your work colleagues that become your friends. So
Yeah.
it's beneficial, and I've got a lot out of it.
I wanted to know if you've actually driven with or coached anyone famous.
That's a good question. No, not off the top of my head. There's always like people that might be like social media stars, but you and I don't really know who they are. You know what I mean? Like influencers.
Yeah.
We get quite a few of them at some of the driver training events that we do for Jaguar or Mercedes Benz. Anyone really, really famous? No, I don't think so, to be honest. I don't think so.
Have you got any stories about a driving fail that you might have witnessed or seen? Not necessarily in driver training world, it could be in the racing world.
The story that I do have, it does highlight how communication is so goddamn important. So I had a guy, we're doing an event in New Zealand at Hampton Downs, and it was wet at the time, so I was a bit cautious. We were in Maseratis at the time, so very expensive car. And you got to remember, our job is just to literally look after those things on those days. So we're going through a series of corners, and I kept saying to him, wait, just wait, just wait. And what I meant by that was, I don't want you to put power on just yet. I just want you to basically roll through the corner. When you can see the exit, then we'll accelerate. But he was really eager to get in the gas on the power. So I'm like, wait, wait, wait. Every time I said wait, he'd put more gas on, more power, more power, more power, more power. Anyway, so we survived a run, and I said, like, I'm not being funny, but do you understand what I mean or what I'm saying? He goes, yeah, I understand. And I said, well, why are you putting more power on? And he said, well, because you're saying wait, like put weight on the throttle. And I'm like, no, I mean wait, be patient, hold off.
That's a classic one. Good
So
one.
from that day on, I thought I've really got to be very clear in what I mean, because and in his defense, there's a lot going on when you're like never driven a car on a racetrack, and it's probably a very fast car. You don't know where the track goes. It's wet. They don't have the capacity to take all this information in, let alone like hear what I'm saying, or maybe decipher what I'm saying. So I needed to be clearer on that day. And I remember I did like a really basic rally thing. And I had a navigator with me telling me what was coming up next. And half the time I couldn't process what he was saying because I was concentrating so much on what I was doing. And I remember thinking, that's what they're experiencing when I'm telling them something as a passenger, trying to coach them. So the more simplistic I can be, the better. And you do start to learn when to talk, when not to talk, how much to talk, whether you need to grab the wheel. Like you read body language a lot better as you get better at it. But yeah, that was a funny story. We actually, even the guy, he was like in stitches laughing. He goes, I don't know why I thought that, but that's hilarious.
That's classic. That is a good one. What about when you're not on track? What sort of things keep you occupied?
Well, this year has forced me a little bit to get a bit more involved in the family business. I did want to do a little bit more of it, but with the COVID stuff and no driver training work whatsoever, it sort of has forced me earlier to get a bit more involved. So that's been really good. It's given me something to do every day. So I really haven't had any time off, so to speak. But then I've been trying to fit in all this other stuff with the iRacing and all the virtual stuff, which I'm no good at. So I've had to get a sim and build it up and learn, what makes the sim tick. And I feel like I'm definitely getting better. There's no doubt about it. But that's a totally different sort of sensation because there's no movement. So all those things I spoke about before about feeling all these sensors from your backside. Well, none of that's happening. You're doing it through your eyes and the steering. So it's taken me a fair bit to adjust to. But I do see there is benefit in doing the sim stuff. Like how much it actually is relevant to driving on a racetrack, I don't know, because I haven't been back on a racetrack. But I think it keeps you thinking about it. Even in the races, you're working out where that person in front of you is weak, where you're going to try and pass them, whether your tires are going away, whether you need to look after them a little bit. Am I braking too deep? Why is the car behaving like that? All this stuff that you always process, you're processing it in a different way, but you're still thinking about it. So I think it is beneficial. So that's the closest thing that I can do to keep myself or keep my eye in this period, and hopefully make sure I'm ready to go for Bathurst. But to be honest, besides some of that stuff, I'm doing a podcast, as we mentioned as well, which I've never really thought I would do it, and I sort of got talked into it. But I've been enjoying that. I think it's something new and different, and something else to focus on. And then I suppose training aside from all that, and then a family as well. So fitting all that in as well. It's actually been quite busy in a weird way, because everyone's locked down and not meant to be doing a lot, but because I'm still trying to do all this other stuff, I feel like I've been just as busy as ever, but no travel at all. So that I certainly haven't missed traveling and getting home late. And
you mentioned about the sim stuff and how you weren't a natural at it. You didn't jump into it and find it straight away. But do you think there'd be any value in getting your dad back out on the apexes, telling you to get closer? And
on the sim stuff, like all the young guys and girls just absolutely thrash me. Like they obviously spend a lot of time on it. They've got a bit more time available to them, but they've grown up with it.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of catching up to do. But I definitely have improved. There's no doubt about that. I'm still certainly no sim pro. I think there's a big difference between someone that's a racing driver that drives in the sim reasonably well, and then a sim pro. Like they must I think they end up driving in a way that we would never contemplate driving. It's not natural for us at all, and it's outside of probably what we should be doing. And I want to try and replicate it as much as I can. So to give you a bit of insight, like at DJR, they have a sim set up that has same steering wheel, same pedals, same position of the gear lever, sway bar adjusters. They have a clutch sitting on the ground, so the clutch pedal feels the same weight. Same with the brake calipers. So they're trying to make it as realistic as possible. Although it's not perfect, but you're going through that process. So before Bathurst last year, we were trying to practice saving fuel. We were doing our brake bias adjuster. They'd make changes to the balance of the car, and then I could actually adjust the sway bars to try and compensate for it. So if you use it as a tool, I reckon it's got a lot of benefits. My sim's obviously not that advanced, but I'm trying to get as close as I can to something like that.
So that setup is not necessarily about the precise visual cues and things like that, but it's the environment that it's trying to generate to be replicating what you're going to do. What other hobbies and skills do you have? Are you able to play a musical instrument?
I can juggle.
You can?
I can juggle, yeah. I learned that at high school when I probably wasn't concentrating like I should. And I can actually juggle really well.
Now, you're good at exercise.
I am good at exercise. That is one thing that I am fairly disciplined with, that sort of stuff, because I do enjoy it. I see the benefit in it, and I like at the moment with all this COVID stuff, and it is tough for everyone at the moment. There's no doubt about it. And the exercise for me has been a way of having a bit of a release, getting my mind in the right, getting myself in the right frame of mind, I should say. So that I've been using that more for that side rather than trying to get to the next fitness level or anything like that. So But I do enjoy it. There's no doubt about it. But probably the biggest thing I've noticed during this period is just trying to set myself a few challenges. Otherwise I think I would have gone crazy. Just ticking over every day, doing the same thing. Not trying to push into different areas or learn new skills. I got my forklift license actually. Unbelievable.
Another thing to race around the track.
Exactly. So yeah, that was quite funny because they're like, "Oh, have you ever driven a forklift?" I'm like, "No." I've been driving one for years at Dad's workshop, and I thought it's just about time that I should actually get my license because if something happens, we're going to be in trouble here. Yes, I went and did that. It's so funny, like working at my dad's shop. I'll be cleaning spray booths, or I'll be, tidying up or whatever, and the guys that I'm working with, they're like, "So when you were racing around Bathurst for one of the best teams in the country, did you ever think that you'd be cleaning out a spray booth and like up to your eyeballs in mess?" I'm like, "Nah, not really." It's a bit different when it's a family business, though. You don't really care. You just get stuck into it. I think it's very beneficial, the fitness side. I mean, I'm doing this French tour at the moment, which is supporting Lifeline, which I just think is so important at the moment because there's so many people that they're struggling big time, massively struggling, whether it be financially. They don't have a job, they don't see any reason to keep going. They can't see what's going to happen in the future, whether it's going to be positive. There's so much negativity. The economy's buggered. Very easy to get yourself in a downward spiral. So again, I haven't personally been affected by for anyone that's I haven't been affected by Lifeline. Let's say that. But I can see at the moment a lot of people need that extra support. And again, it gives me another challenge, another reason to go training and challenge myself. I mean, I did a ride today that I would never do because I'd just look at it and go, "Well, that looks bloody too hard." Because you got that accountability. I'm doing with the group of friends. You get on the bike and you tough it out and you think, well, if this is as tough as it's going to get today, it ain't that bad.
Yeah. Actually, that's where we first met. Would have been not through driver training, but on the bike back in those when we had the supercar cycling team or whatever, not team, but
every Saturday.
Yeah,
every Saturday we used to do that regularly.
You don't seem to have much spare time, but if you do have spare time to read a book or watch a movie, have you got any favorite books or favorite movies?
Look, I haven't got a favorite book because I haven't done a book yet. So until that happens, I haven't got any favorite books. No, I'm not a big reader. And I like just really light-hearted movies, funny stuff. I just like to relax. Whereas Steph likes, murder mysteries and James Bond and all this stuff that, is a bit intense for me when I just want to relax. So she hates my movie choice, but I just like, like a Will Ferrell movie or just something stupid, corny, but just to relax.
You don't have to think about, just let it be stupid in front of you. Yeah. And what about goals for the rest of your driving career? There's obviously still quite a long career ahead of you.
Look, I think everything's changed a little bit. In a perfect world, I'd like to keep doing the co-driver role in supercars because I love the sport. I think supercars is an amazing category. In Australia, it's so professional, so tough. I love watching it. And like I said, I'd like to tick off a few more tracks, maybe international races. And the TCR stuff, I'd like to keep doing that as well. But it's just going to have to see what opportunities are around. I'm not on that path anymore of trying to go full-time racing in supercars or anything like that. I'm really happy with what I'm doing. I'd rather race 3 times a year for a really good organization than be toughing it out down the back of supercars in something I know that can't do the job. And and probably earning no money and doing it really hard. Like you do that when you're younger and you don't have the commitments with family, mortgage, all that sort of stuff. You can go and chase those dreams, and I've probably done that part of my life. So yeah, I'd like to just keep trucking along like I am, and I think I'm in a pretty good place. But I think it's all going to change, and I don't know what that looks like just yet.
Any motivational statements? Have you got any sort of things that you reflect upon in terms of motivation? Something you have stuck on your wall that you read every morning to keep you motivated? What's a sort of a statement from Tony D'Alberto?
I don't know. I don't have anything on my wall. I don't know. Like I sort of live by being consistent, rocking up. I think that's probably the hardest thing, like just rocking up and trying to do the job rather than worrying about it. Just take it as it comes rather than stress about the future of what could happen. This guy said that, what if that happens, all these different scenarios. And it's like, well, you can't control any of that sort of stuff. So I'm sort of a big believer in preparing myself the best I can, whether that be physically, whether that be vision, data, like mentally, and then the rest hopefully will happen. So that's probably, I don't have a tattoo that says, race hard or go home or whatever. I'm a big one for preparation. And I reckon as you get a bit older, you probably live by that a bit more.
Finally, have you got any social links that you would like to tell everyone about?
Yes, of course I have things that I want to self-promote. How silly of you. Who do you don't know who you're talking to. Definitely got to promote our podcast, Parked Up. All right, you can go on Spotify or Apple, whatever, however you get your podcast. Make sure you listen. It's weekly, and we interview supercar guys, racing legends, John Bowe, whoever we want to chat to. We generally get a couple of guests each week, talk about motorsport, events that have been on. We have a little news section as well, a little bit of a recap. We've even got like a couple of sponsors on board. Unbelievable scenes. So I do it with a friend of mine, Grant Rowley, who's been in motorsport a long time. But Parked Up is our podcast. We're going to get a website soon.
Who was one of your first sponsors in that?
A good friend of mine, Evolve Driver Training, actually donated a few gifts.
It was meant to be spread out over 4 weeks, but you gave out 4 weeks in 1 week. So, all your mates got fired.
Sorry about that. So your marketing campaign went from a month to just a week.
Yeah. What about any accidents worth chatting about? And you've actually had 2 occasions at the Bathurst 12 Hour where you haven't necessarily been involved in the 12 Hour.
One of them was I was racing with Maranello, and practice 1, I came together with a gentleman driver, a slower driver that was trying to let cars go. I was tucked up behind an Audi, and that gentleman driver who was in an Aston Martin at the time, he was pulled to the side coming down the mountain. So from the dipper to the elbow. So it's sort of a series of lefts and rights. And he saw the Audi, and he thought he could tuck in behind the Audi once he'd come past, but he didn't know I was really hard up behind the Audi. So anyway, I've come past, he's clipped my back wheel, and I'll just pinball down the road, similar to what Chaz did, but not as bad. I didn't break any bones or anything like that. But I tell you what, it destroyed a car that day. First practice session of the 12 Hour. Destroyed a Ferrari. I mean, that's a bad day in anyone's book. So I learned a few things out of that one.
You were a bit sore.
I was a little bit.
Yeah,
I was a little bit sore.
Was that the worst physical?
I was sharing the. Yeah, definitely. It was my fault though, because I was sharing the car with a bigger guy, and he jumped out and I jumped in. There wasn't a lot of time left in the session, and I decided that my side belts weren't perfect. They weren't tight enough, but I was gonna miss out on running in that session if I had spent the time to do it, right? So I pulled down my belts, the chest belts, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay, it's fine, let's go. And they weren't that bad. Honestly, it wasn't like that you could fit another person in there. They just weren't really tight down over my hips. But the impact was so heavy that I felt like I almost headbutted the steering wheel. Like it felt like I come out of the seat that far. I mean, they probably stretched a bit as well, but just to have that little bit of slack in the belt ended up hurting my back quite a bit, and took a little bit of recovery. Thankfully, it wasn't too bad. So that was a big shunt, that one. It took me by surprise because I thought the guy had seen me, so I didn't expect there to be any contact. It wasn't like I could see it coming. You know, I'd passed that car, and then suddenly I'm like, whoa, what's happened? You know, into the fence I went, and I just felt like I was going to go through the windscreen. I'd moved that much in the seat. So there was a couple of lessons there, obviously, with the belts, but not when you're driving in a professional championship like supercars. You got a lot of respect for people around you, and you can predict what they're going to do a lot more than when you drive with amateur drivers. They're unpredictable, so you need to give them more space and maybe not worry about passing them on, you know, in that particular part of the circuit. Your lap's already buggered, so you might as well just spend a bit more time, do it safely. But I'd just come out of main series at the time, so I'm just like, go, you know, like push, flat out. And yeah, I come unstuck, unfortunately. So that was a big shunt. But that's actually the only shunt that I've had at the 12 hour. The following year, the car got crashed again, but I wasn't in it this time. So, and then actually thinking about it, that was the start of the race. Start of the race. So I was racing actually with Mika Salo, and he didn't want to do the start of the race. Because I don't think he actually has, his eyesight was that amazing, and he didn't want to do it. So anyway, they got him to do the start of the race, cold tires, and like come together with someone at turn 2, got spun, hit the wall, end of our day. So that was a real shame. But I think another one that you're referring to is in another Ferrari, and it was the year before that shunt, and I did it with Tony De Felice, and everyone thought that I'd crashed that car because his name's Tony as well. But he, it was his first lap out in practice, and he came together with another car and wrote the thing off on his first out lap. He was trying to let cars pass because he didn't know basically which way the track went, and, you know, come together with another car, you know, and just turn the thing into an absolute banana. So I haven't had a lot of success at the 12 hour, put it that way. I've been there many times in cool cars. Like this year, I didn't get to drive in the race either. We had an international driver come over, and unfortunately he crashed as well. So maybe I should not do that race anymore.
So that's 4 occasions at least that you haven't even done a lap.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a big investment.
And you know what? It's a big lead up to that event, because you've just spent all Christmas getting ready, training. You know, it's the first race of the year, really tough one, 12 hours. Do all the practice, and then you get to the race and nothing. You're back on the road, heading home by 9 o'clock. The good thing is there though, none of them I had to pay for any damage, so that was even better.
Your Bathurst 12 hours is actually the 12 hours driving home. So
yes, exactly. You know, like, we had a good opportunity last year to get another podium at Bathurst, and the car was bloody amazing, honestly. The first practice session last year at the 1000, I remember driving the thing going, man, this thing is so good. Like, it's just doing everything I wanted to do. We're not having to take a lot of risk to get a lap time. It's comfortable. I really thought we were on for a strong result, and the day proved that. Obviously, what happened in the end was, well, I don't really know what happened in the end, to be honest. Like, I'll probably never find out. But getting the penalty, the fine, the team got a massive fine, and sort of to be part of that was all very crap. It wasn't a good time, but unless Fabian had a different pre-brief than what I did with the team or engineer, I certainly was never ever told that if we say this on the radio, it means that, or debris means this, or nothing. Like, honestly, nothing. So you're almost like accused of being cheated. And it's like, well, unless they had a different meeting, there was certainly no chat about it from my end. So anyway, that was a really bad. We ended up leaving Bathurst with really bad taste in our mouth, I guess, and it wasn't taken lightly at all. So I remember Fabs had to explain himself to Roger and the team, to try and find out what happened, try and get to the bottom of it all. So I don't think it was as sinister as what people think. I was in the caravan at the time, and I saw that safety car, and I was like, oh shit, I don't know if this is going to help or hurt us in the race. But then when I saw the gap that Fabs had left, I ran out of the caravan to the pits to see what's going on. Like, have we got a drama or what? Like, we're getting in trouble for this, So I was as surprised as everybody else, and that ruined our day, no doubt about it.
And ruining your day ruins a whole year, because Bathurst is everything for you as an endurance rider.
That is a tough one, because I don't like to let on how old I am these days. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's what we do in the podcast. The amount of times we stuff up on the podcast, and then Grant has to chop it up. Is he all right? What's happened?
I'm not sure what happened. I think he's into my car. I'm not too sure how bad
Is the car okay?
I don't know. Look at
Okay.
it so well. That's from earlier. God knows. Don't worry.
Okay. Are you all right, mate? Are you all right? Do you need to have a rest?
Yeah,
You sound okay. Oh, bro.
I don't mean to laugh, but that sounded quite funny.
I'm like, do you need to come inside? He's like, no, I'm fine. And he's like losing his mind. Like, he's just fallen off his bike and cut his knee open. Oh my God.
Hey!
Hang on one sec. Yes. What for? I'll be out there in 5 minutes. All right. I'm on the phone, mate. Okay. All right. 5 minutes. Righto. Oh my God.
He just kept popping his head around.
Yeah. Right.
Always got out of work early when you'd be on an Evolve driving day.
No, Evolve days are good because you let me go so I can pick the kids up. When we're away with Jag or whatever, you're flying home at 10:30 at night and you think it's not good.
No. And especially when some other little shit gets you to drive him home from the airport on the way, which isn't really on the way. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You
No, we're not going to name names.
No. So, yeah, definitely. You make some friends out of it, and you get to bond with people, and like yourself and myself, I'd always try and sit on the plane and listen to my podcast, and you'd sit next to me and just talk to you, tell me all about yourself for an hour and a half, whatever the plane ride was.
Yes.
So I had no choice but to become your friend.
That is true. That
Yeah.
is very true. Now, I'm sure you just wanted this chat to be, 25 minutes, something like that, but it's been an hour and a half now. So what can I say? You know what the problem is? We haven't done a driver training event for a while, so I haven't been able to talk anyone's ear off for a while. No one's been listening. Steph's sick of hearing about it, mate.
That's all of our questions done.